What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and we are back with the 10 Deaths of Wolverine. X Deaths of Wolverine? Basically the story of Moira X. And again, I didn't think you guys would love the first one as much as you did. It was kind of crazy. I was just like, do you guys really want me to continue this? Because it seems a little weird. And you guys were like, yes! I figured so many of you guys are just gonna be like, no, I don't want to see this anymore. So here's the thing, right? Again, the whole idea behind this is that this story largely follows Moira Mactaggert, right? The whole thing behind this basically being after her ousting, where she was basically booted from Krakoa and basically sent, kind of given a little bit of leeway or a little bit of lead time, and that Mystique was like, I'm gonna find you and kill you, just so you know. She's basically been on the run ever since. What she ends up doing is basically running up on a gas station where some poor sap starts making conversation with the wrong person, and basically she grabs a burner phone, ties the guy up, duct tapes his mouth, and then calls Jane Foster. Now remember, Jane Foster was the one who initially did an examination on Moira because she was like coughing up blood, different things like that. She didn't fully know what was going on, and they ended up determining that she basically had cancer. But while Moira's been on the run, Jane Foster's been investigating this whole thing, which, by the way, gas prices are $3.20. Must be nice, right? Like, gas prices are $4 where I'm at. But what ends up happening is Jane Foster basically realizes that with this cancer that Moira Mactaggert has, that it's got floronic matter that's woven directly into it. What this indicates is Moira may or may not have cancer, but whatever it is that's killing her basically came from Krakoa. In effect, you could make an argument she was poisoned. And that's really what it looks to be here, right? It's what it really looks like here, is that she was either slowly being poisoned or was suddenly poisoned, and now it's basically killing her. And so in response to that, of course, she basically ends up kind of going on the run. And while she's doing that, you have this alternate version of Wolverine who shows up, attacks some guys who are basically shark hunting, kills them all, or really just makes them like jump in the water and leaves them there. But I mean, come on, like he leaves them stranded in the middle of the ocean. These guys are gonna die. And then takes the boat and basically heads after Moira Mactaggert. Now for Moira herself, this is cool, man. I love the way Benjamin Percy does this, right? It was one thing to show us Moira Mactaggert in terms of like how ruthless she could be regarding the whole plan she had, right? One of the things that was established in Hickman's Inferno is that up until that point, it was largely believed that Moira Mactaggert was working with Xavier and Magneto in order to engineer a circumstance whereby mutants could basically survive the future Holocaust they would go through, and facing off against basically like the post-human race, so kind of like evolved humans as well as like machines. But the reality of the plan is that Moira Mactaggert basically expected, or at least intended, to engineer mutants in such a way to where she would basically wipe them out, where they would just be born without a mutant gene, and then there would be no war between humans and mutants and post-humans because there would be no mutants, so the war could never happen in the first place. It is one thing to give us that, right, and to say, damn man, that's kind of cold-blooded. Dude, what she does here is nuts, man. This is some crazy stuff. So check this out. She comes to this realization that the means by which she's being tracked is largely because of the phalanx arm, or the Technoc arm, that she has, right? This is a piece of technology that basically came from like Warlock. It's living machinery is really what it is. And so in realizing that, she's like, the only way to do this is to basically cut it off. Now remember, she has this because she lost her arm. So she's literally gonna cut off this artificial arm that she has. This chick, not even lying to you guys, right? Not even lying. This girl fills, like, she literally charges up an iron, right? So like she turns an iron on, basically starts heating it up. She fills a bathtub with water and iodine, right? Which iodine is really good for like killing bacteria and so on. Gets into this thing, right? Like naked as the day she was born, and then drinks a whole bunch of whiskey because Lord knows she's gonna need it. Like heats up a knife and then cuts her arm off, and then uses an iron to cauterize the wound. Let me tell you something, man. That's some hardcore, and I'm not even lying. No one could say that Moira Mactaggert is not badass after seeing her do that. That is nuts. Like, dude, I was sitting here reading through this and I was like, Jesus, Benjamin Percy, you're not pulling any punches, son. Dude, Moira Mactaggert, man. Like, I have a whole new level of respect for Moira Mactaggert now. Like, it's like, okay, before she was like a thinker, but like, it was one of those things where like she's got like a mind and like she wants to do stuff, but you kind of had this feeling that like when it all hits the fan, she's gonna like run and cry because like reality caught up to her and it was too much for her to handle. No, son, man, this woman's got to wear counts. This is nuts. Now, because Mystique is using the Technarch arm of Moira Mactaggert to track her, of course, Mystique shows up at this hotel pretending to be some old man who's been traveling looking for his daughter. When the guy tells him, like, look, it's like $50, right, pay in cash, this guy's like, look, man, you know, I'll take your money. I'll take the $100 you're going to give me instead of the 50, but I'm not giving you any questions. And Mystique, right, ever the person with the best social skills, right, just knows how to talk to people, literally says, oh, really? Like, I think you will, right? Everybody talks eventually. It's just a matter of how many many bones they want to have broken, and she takes it to this guy, right? Like literally, like she puts a knife in his shoulder, right? Broke a few of his bones, and then literally like disguises herself as the guy, goes to the room of Moira Mactaggert, and again, Moira Mactaggert, man, being a badass, dude. So she basically knew that Mystique was gonna catch her eventually, and then basically plants a bomb under the bed and makes it look like she's in that bed, basically with like, you know, blood on the sheets and all that kind of stuff. The whole thing explodes, right? The whole thing like literally goes off, and it kills Mystique, right? But remember, death is not an absolute anymore. The death of Mystique and deaths in the X-Men stories are not necessarily plot devices. They basically allow writers to get away with things that they wouldn't normally be able to get away with. That's kind of the big thing that I want to iterate here, right? Death serving as a plot device is one of those things where like when Superman died, it's like, damn, Superman died and he got beat to death by Doomsday. Oh my God, it's this catastrophic thing. It's like the saddest thing ever. And that was like the thing that came after, right? Like, oh my God, Colossus died when he sacrificed himself to develop a cure for the legacy virus in the late 1990s. Oh my God, this person died. And the writers build it up that way. Like, it's the saddest moment ever because this person died, and they have like a funeral in the comics and all that shit. And then the person like comes back. The good thing about what they're doing in the X-Men comics now is they're like, yeah, Mystique got blown up, but like she's gonna come back, right? Like they're gonna resurrect her. So it's cool to see them using death as a means, as kind of a storytelling device, as opposed to just being like a way to drum up sales, right? And just make it all seem really sad and take away from the meaning of it. And so of course, you know, again, we know Mystique's gonna come back, but one of the things that happens is we kind of switch over to Destiny for a second. Irene Adler, love Irene Adler. I've been a fan of her ever since I started reading comics. If you had her information, you basically know exactly what to do in order to like avoid, one, all the pitfalls that the mutants were gonna face, and two, basically be able to conquer the world. But the thing about this is she of course kind of muses about how Mystique believed that like the future was negotiable, that somehow the future can be changed, and the response of Destiny is no. Like the future is basically an absolute thing. I know exactly where we're headed. She doesn't really give us a whole lot of information. She says, but in the end, not all is lost, right? That a figure keeps materializing in the mind of Destiny, basically this kind of man in black, as she describes him, Death himself. Now, this is important because what this does is it seems to hint at a few things. One, that yes, that basically Moira Mactaggert has been ousted by the entirety of the mutant community, or at least those who were in the Quiet Council. Nobody else really knew about her, so they couldn't really oust her. But two, it seems like she really is hell-bent on effectively nullifying the mutant population. That motivation hasn't gone away. That it is coming from a place of genuine like love and concern. She wants to save the mutant race, but it's one of those things where it's like, in order to save mutants, she basically has to end mutants. So whether it comes from a place of altruism or it comes from a place of just being a terrible human being, her actions are basically the same as Orcus and everybody else. The desire to get rid of the mutant population. One of the things to understand is we could potentially be looking at another House of M type situation. Not in the sense that like you're going to see the you know, Scarlet Witch lose her mind and, you know, take away 98% of the mutant powers population, but in the sense that we could be looking at like a wholesale consolidation of the mutant race to make it more manageable and really bring the comics closer in line with whatever it is that happens in the Marvel Cinematic Universe regarding the X-Men, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of all this whole era of the X-Men, Krakoa's gone, right? I mean, keep in mind, when we were talking about Dark Reign and all that stuff, which we need to go back and cover all the X-Men stories from the mid-2000s. God, I have ADHD so bad. One of the things that happened is the X-Men left Westchester, right? They left New York. They took up residence on an island called Utopia off the coast of San Francisco, and that didn't last too long, right? They eventually ended up going back, and then now you basically have them on Krakoa. So again, it's one of these things where this whole thing about Krakoa will likely come to an end. You know, when that'll happen, we don't fully know, but we know that eventually it will. The other part of this is that the pod that this evil version or this dark version of Wolverine emerged from is basically being investigated by Forge, and really just kind of being followed up on with like Jean Grey and Professor X, right? They're kind of keeping an eye on Forge as he's doing all this. And one of the things that Forge says is like, this pod, whatever this is, the biology doesn't match up. Basically, this thing is thousands of years older than Krakoa. So how it could possibly be on Krakoa and us not know about it or having just recently discovered it doesn't make any sense, right? Like, we would have noticed this when Krakoa formed. The only alternative here is that this is basically an object out of time, that it ended up here, but it's either not from our time and it's from a different place in time entirely, and somehow just manifested here. We don't know. Like, I have no real idea. And honestly, Benjamin Percy ain't giving us any details. Like, that's literally all we get on this thing. But then at that point, you switch back to Wolverine, and this is when I think we start getting clues on what's going on with Wolverine himself. That what happens here is that when Wolverine emerges, right, when he shows up at what was basically the hotel where everything went down between Mystique and Moira Mactaggert, that of course cops are on the scene, the fire department's on the scene, putting out the fire, all that kind of stuff, you know, emergency services, basically what you would expect. And where couple of cops are stupid enough to try to stop Wolverine. Of course, he ends up getting past the two of them, and then goes in there and basically finds what is the burned corpse, right? The charred corpse of Mystique, as well as essentially the arm of Moira Mactaggert that was left behind. And then ultimately you end up seeing these kinds of things where he starts talking about this idea of like the phalanx and like Technarch and so on and so forth, and like this kind of machine component and different things along those lines. And so what this looks like here, right? Once he basically accesses a kind of terminal and basically starts downloading information on where Moira Mactaggert would most likely go, which is basically the Epiphany Labs, right? We learned about that in some of the previous stories, that of course he leaves and goes on his way. What this looks like here, this is one of the things to keep in mind. The phalanx in the House and Powers of X storyline, when Jonathan Hickman first kicked off the X-Men, the phalanx had seemingly just kind of become this hyper-evolved organism, right? That right now in the present day, the phalanx just exists out there as a kind of machine organism that is like very similar to the Borg from like Star Trek, right? They exist to like quote unquote better themselves and assimilate the various things around them. They've been successful in some ways, they've been unsuccessful in most ways. For example, like the whole Cameron Hodge storyline way back in the 1990s, which was just an amazing storyline. When Cameron Hodge became the leader of the phalanx, that was great. There's a lot of like those older Marvel stories that we didn't cover. We should bring back a day where we basically just cover like the older Marvel stuff, right? Like the X-Men from like the mid 2000s. So we covered stuff like Messiah Complex and all that, but like the things in between, and then going into like Hope Summers and like the 12 Lights and all that kind of stuff, which basically dead ends into the story of like Avengers versus X-Men, going into like the cosmic stories, right? So like we did Annihilation and like Infinity and all that kind of stuff, but we never did like War of Kings or Realm of Kings or anything like that. Like we should do those stories. Like that would be legit, just like dedicated day and just cover that stuff, essentially in sequence. But the thing about this is that when Moira Mactaggert looks in this whole situation, she says like, I've lived and I've died and I've lived, right? Over and over again. The mutants always meet their end. They wanted this time to be different and they got their wish. I've seen the future. I just didn't think it would get here so fast. And so what this looks like is that in that far-flung future, when the phalanx had basically become this just kind of almost omnipresent figure that would actually travel around the cosmos, very similar to the way the Celestials did. And when they reached a race or came across a race that had achieved a high enough level of technological advancement and basically merged that technology with themselves and would be absorbed into the phalanx, it looks like they've effectively sent one of their own into the past. And that's what it looks like with Wolverine. Now, again, we don't know that, right? We don't know if that's the case. I'm just guessing here, right? We won't know until we get further along into the story. But regardless, man, okay, so you guys were right when you said like we should just let this play out and just see how it goes. It's getting really good. It's getting really, really good. So much so that I think it's actually teetering on being better than the 10 Lives of Wolverine. But again, these are really, really good stories. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this to an end. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.